Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the NOTCAST. It is Sunday the 15th of November 2020 and I'm going to be talking about album sequencing today. Now, there's a lot of people that tell you that the album doesn't really exist or that the album is dead, and that's not true. We're all curating and experiencing albums every day. What album style experiences? First and foremost, there's about 4,000 million YouTube and Spotify playlists. That's where the user and the listener is creating their own album. There are individual MP3 playlists that we've got on our computers if we download and keep MP3s, and it goes all the way back to the ages of home taping, where you change the sequence of the album and the songs if you thought that the songs could perhaps be a little bit better. And even in the day when we didn't have home taping, the artists themselves was creating an album sequence through the order and the succession by which they put the songs onto the records that they released and the songs and versions that they chose. Now, there's some thought that doesn't really matter in the age of YouTube and Spotify, is that your playlist will be set to random and whatever comes next. But even an algorithm is setting a playlist. And when people think about classic albums, and I don't necessarily think some of the ones I'm about to mention are classic albums, but when people talk about classic albums, they're not just talking about the big hits on there. They're talking about the arrangement of the songs in the order in which they're chosen and the versions of the songs that are picked, so that create the overall combined effect. An album isn't just made out of hit singles unless it's Michael Jackson's Thriller. Or maybe Bad, which I think had 8 singles out of 10 songs on the album, 9 if you include the CD bonus track "Leave Me Alone." What we're talking about, what makes an album a classic album, is that the songs that are chosen, the order that those songs are chosen in, the versions of the songs that are chosen to create an overall experience that takes the listener, from one place to another. Now, I think of an album as being like a 45 minute audio movie. It has peaks, it has troughs, it has moments of high drama, it has moments of quiet, and it'll take you through all of those. Now, imagine if you were watching Star Wars and you put all the best scenes at the start of the movie, and then you put the less amazing scenes at the end. Obviously, the album would open with the Death Star exploding. Then maybe you might have the lightsaber fight. Then you might have the dog fight that's in the middle when they're escaping the Millennium Falcon. And then the last scene would probably be the one where Luke's arguing with his mum and dad over blue milk about how he doesn't want to go to Tashi to pick up some power converters or something. He can play with his friends some other time. Boy, that would be a bad movie, wouldn't it? It's really important that you put, the right sequences in the right order, in the right context, so they complement and complement each other correctly, and they make it a better and an overall more enjoyable experience. So album sequence is incredibly important. And I'm going to talk about, what I think the ideal shape of a record should be. So this is something I've made earlier. That's how I think an album sequence should work. We'll start here. Starts off with a high. Let's say it's got album. So you start off there, and really every album, I think, should start with a slow and gentle introduction of instruments in a layered fashion, one by one. Unless your album has a particular characteristic that's full on and relentless, at which point, click of the sticks, 1, 2, 3, 4, go bang, and then the noise just goes straight in. Even Master of Puppets starts with Battery and not Master of Puppets, as a way of building a gentle and slow introduction into the album, is to get you used to hearing the instruments that are coming in bit by bit. Other albums, including what I regard to be one of the most perfectly sequenced albums of all time, The Cure's Disintegration, starts with the gentle chimes introducing the music before there's a moment where everything kicks in and it explodes. So it's all about tension and release is what makes an album really great. So you've got to create the tension to start off with. So this is like my idea of what a perfect album would look like, is that you have a slow and gentle introduction. You have a couple of songs that really kind of put and introduce the drama. If you think about a James Bond movie, it's the introductory scene where James Bond is inevitably killing some bad guys, driving a car or flying a plane, and there's some explosions. And then you kind of have this sequence here where you explain the plot of the movie. Oh, Mr. Bond, it's a man that wants to take over the world using oil and lasers and cats, or whatever it is. Maybe this might be the ballad, takes tempo down a little bit, gives the listener a little bit of a break before the next part of the album, and then you kind of bring it back up. Here's a couple of action scenes for you, a couple of big hits, opening side 2 of the album if you want to be traditional about it, and then like a slow, gentle rest, and then maybe a final kind of reprise or a great song to end the album on. That's how I think a great album should go. And we're kind of limited by, the formats that we were using. So, for example, if you think about a vinyl record, and I'm just going to quickly pick one out here. This is a classic album, a triumph of sequencing. Absolutely the best versions of every song that there were, placed in exactly the right place to, fully make the record as good as possible. Oh, this one's got a scratch on it. I must have loved it when I was a child. You think about that, the limitations of El Vinyl Disc are very much that, you've got, you can have the louder tracks at the start. As the grooves get tighter and closer together, as you get to the inside of the disc, it has to get quieter. It can't handle such, because the rotations that we've got on there get smaller and smaller with each concentric groove. Is that you can't have a really big loud track right at the end of the album unless it's very, very well cut. And that's the thing that you've got. And then obviously you've got the moment where you pause, you swap, you switch it over, you put on side 2, and you see how side 2 is. An album in the old days was basically built of two episodes of music up to 30 minutes, normally probably around about 23, 24 minutes of music, and then you'd have to stop, pause, and so it naturally cuts itself into being a two-parter. These days, obviously, with CDs, you can have up to 80 minutes of music on a CD, or on a cassette. In the days when they did cassettes, I think you could have up to 100 minutes of music on that. On a playlist, it can be whatever length you actually want it to be. There is nothing stopping you. I'm sure if I was some kind of abstract artist, I'd come up with something like a 24-hour album of songs. And of course, the Flaming Lips did it in 2011 with the 24-hour song Skull. That was one single song that was made out of something like 40 or 50 separate different parts. And actually, an album, when you think about it, is one song that's made out of several different constituent parts with little gaps and breaks in between them. Now, sometimes artists do that so that the whole album kind of flows and sequences together in one row, so it feels like you're listening to one song. And this example is particularly good. Dark Side of the Moon. Obviously, I've mentioned this before. It's a fantastic album, a triumph of sequencing. Every song on it is in exactly the right place to complement the other songs that are around it. It follows the same kind of trend which I mentioned earlier. It starts with a heartbeat of Speak to Me. It moves into a full band track with Breathe. It then has a slight lull with On the Run, and then it goes back into Time, and the ending of Time leads very nicely into the next track, which is a reprise of Breathe, and then effectively there's almost like a palette cleanser, a quiet moment. So if you watch an Avengers movie, there's an action scene in there, and there's a bit where they all stop and they kind of look and talk to each other and go, every album needs that little moment, that little pause where it stops, you think about it, and you go right back into it. So, and then maybe you go into side 2, which is why the last song on side 1 generally is quite relaxed. It's more ballady. Obviously, not always the case, but it helps in just creating a pause, because a human attention span can't take full on for hours and hours and hours. We do have to have breaks. We have to have moments where it's perhaps not quite so goddamn intense, and that's one of the things which Dark Side of the Moon does. Europa does it. Joshua Tree do it. These are all albums I'm going to mention shortly. And then you flip over onto side B, and you've got one track that starts with Money, and effectively Money fades out, and the end of Money is actually the fade in to Us and Them. It's a single keyboard line that then you've got like the end of Us and Them, you've got a drum roll, and then you go into any colour that you like, and the whole thing sounds like it's one 25-minute song made out of 5 separate constituent parts. And I think it's really important to try and make an album that fits that length, fits that style, and has those peaks and troughs that go in it. Now, not every album is particularly well sequenced, and not every album works well for a single vinyl disc. in the days when you had CDs, and I'm sorry, I've just remembered I've got to pick something up from that here. In the days that when you had CDs were the dominant format, and they still are in many, many respects, you don't have a limitation about the length, apart from the fact that it can be 80 minutes. You get a thing which I call CD bloat, which we very obviously got here with Tori Amos's Boys for Pele. Around about this time, Tori Amos, having full and complete artistic control, could put as many songs as she likes on an album in whatever order that she wanted, and she put 18 songs on this album. This album's about 76 minutes long. Effectively, it's 12 really good songs and 6 okay B-sides, because not every song any artist writes is going to knock it straight out of the park. There's going to be songs that are better or worse, and especially if you're coming towards the end of an album session, and in the days when you would have 2 CD singles per single, you'd have at least 4 singles, so you'd have 8 CD singles, and if you wrote a B-side for each of those CD singles, then you'd suddenly have to come up with 16 extra songs. If you're doing multi-formatting, you might have to put extra songs on a 12-inch, so you'd end up having to write 40 or 50 songs in a year or 2 years. Not every one of those songs is going to be amazing, and then if you put all of those songs out on one CD, firstly, it's going to be a very crowded CD, but secondly, it's going to have areas where you just go, this should have been in the deleted scenes on the DVD. This isn't good enough to be on the album. And I think we can all think of the difference between a classic album and a not classic album is where some of the less amazing songs go on, or perhaps where some of those songs are in the wrong place on the album. So, for example, you want to think about one of the greatest B-sides of all time. Now, the ones that immediately leap out to me are pretty much any Suede B-sides and Acquiesce by Oasis. There's also obviously other B-sides such as Lady with a Spinning Head by U2. Great songs, didn't fit on the album. But that's not a criticism of those songs. Sometimes you have too many good songs. Now, if anybody thinks that, for example, Acquiesce by Oasis is not as good as She's Electric, then frankly we need to talk, because you need to know what a good song is like. But Acquiesce beats the willies out of those other songs. So album sequencing, really, really important. They also come down to where albums run on sides. Now, hands up, I'm going to be really honest about it. The best single side of vinyl there ever is On Parade by Prince. The first 4 songs on side 1 of this album all run together. So it's almost as if it's one song made of 4 parts. There's a tiny microsecond break in between each song, and then the song carries on again, and you also so this is an extra part of the song. It's taken us to a new direction. Even though they're 4 separate and discrete songs, with different names, different identities, different lyrics, different melodies, it all feels like they're continuations from the previous song as one song that comes in 4 parts. So each song is almost like a sequel to another one. But where where sometimes it does go perhaps a little bit wrong, and this is going to be a controversial statement, is the Joshua Tree. Now, lots of people think this is one of the best albums ever made. I don't think this is the best album U2 have made. In fact, I would probably rank it somewhere in the middle of it. But the sequencing for this album is generally regarded as perfect. It isn't quite the case, actually, in my opinion. Now, it was released in 1987 as a single album. It was released in 2017 as two discs, so a double vinyl set. And you open it out and look at this isn't the original inner sleeve, by the way. In fact, very little of my original albums from the 80s have got original inner sleeves, because when I was buying them as a 14-year-old, I was worried about whether it cost 50p more or 50p less, as opposed to does it have its original inner sleeve. I was interested in buying the music. So you look at the track listing that we've got on that, where The Streets Have No Name, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, With or Without You, Bullet the Blue Sky, Running to Stand Still, I think it's Red Hill Mining Town, In God's Country, Trip Through Your Wires, One Tree Hill, Exit, and Mothers of the Disappeared. Now, as far as I'm concerned, actually, that's not the best track listing that there is, because we have a very radical mood shift between With or Without You and Bullet the Blue Sky. So With or Without You has possibly the most effectively minimal guitar solo that's ever existed, and the song kind of fades out into nothingness and it shimmers out. Now, suddenly, track 4 starts on this heavy martial drum beat of Bullet the Blue Sky, totally tonally and sonically shifting the mood of the album. Now, I think Bullet the Blue Sky and Running to Stand Still should be the first 2 tracks on side 2 of the album. And in fact, you should take the ending of With or Without You, which is a gentle fade out into nothingness, and then follow that with One Tree Hill, which starts with a gentle fade in, so it keeps the mood, but it moves the album along, and then One Tree Hill, and then Red Hill Mining Town, and then you start side 2 with Bullet the Blue Sky, and with Running to Stand Still, and then you go for In God's Country, Trip Through Your Wires, Exit, and Mothers of the Disappeared. And in fact, if you wanted to take one song off this, it would be Trip Through Your Wires, because to me that's the worst song on the album. It's not amazing. It's pretty good, but then again, U2 weren't writing bad songs at that point in their career. So yeah, even their less amazing songs were pretty damn good. Now, Kirsty MacColl sequenced this album, so the band themselves couldn't work out how to sequence it. They played it in that order, the order which is on the album, on the 2017 Joshua Tree tour. And playing songs live is very, very different to on a record. So when you're playing them live, you're thinking about how's the audience responding to this, and you've got to try and keep the energy levels up. When you're listening to a record, you aren't listening to it in a room with 70,000 people. You're listening to it in earphones or at home. You generally listen to it as a solitary activity. You might be listening to a record as part of a party, but you're probably going to have a playlist. I haven't been to a party for about 30 years because I was already born very old. So I was born at about the age of about 45, and I've only just slowly got slightly older as we go along. But I think that, the Joshua Tree, even though it's chock full of great songs, perhaps isn't sequenced the way or as strongly as it should be. Let's pick up another U2 album. And one of the reasons I'm doing this, by the way, is because I'm going to be talking through individual artist discographies, and I'm going to be mentioning how I think sequencing is way off. This album, Rattle and Hum, is, in its released form, the worst U2 album that there is. It's a half-arsed compilation hodgepodge of live material and new studio tracks. Now, if you took the new studio tracks off that on its own, it would be great record. Maybe not quite as good as Rattle and Hum, but a great record. But if you add 6 or 7 live songs onto it, turn it into a double album, it then becomes like a frustratingly unevenly paced compilation of good new songs and live songs, some of which you've already heard. So, for example, it's got Pride, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, and Bullet the Blue Sky, which you've already got on a U2 album by the time that you've bought this. So you don't need them, or more correctly, you probably need to have a separate U2 live album from the tour. As it was, the album that they could have released would have been staggeringly good. If you open with Hawkmoon 269, then you have Desire, God Part 2, Angel of Harlem, When Love Comes to Town, Love Rescue Me, Heartland, Van Diemen's Land, and maybe you throw in a Room at the Heartbreak Hotel, or Hallelujah Here She Comes, and then you end with All I Want Is You. That's a good, strong 11-song album. And if you want to get really cheeky, you put in Sweet Fire of Love, which is a song that they recorded with Robbie Robertson in between the Joshua Tree and the Rattle and Hum sessions. That would make the album a lot better and a lot stronger. Whereas traditionally, you're asking people to make an 80-minute commitment in terms of time and to flip the record over 3 or 4 times. And it becomes long, and it becomes an investment of time, which you don't necessarily really want to be making. Also talk about another U2 album, which I think a lot of people rate very, very, very highly indeed. Acton Baby. This is the original 1991 pressing. If you want to know, it's the UK version that has Adam's Adam on it. Now, the track listing for this is designed to be listened to at home, not designed to be played live. Now, I think, again, great album. I think the sequencing is a little off on this. So, for example, I have Zoo Station, The Fly, even better than The Real Thing, Mysterious Ways, Who's Going to Ride Your Wild Horses, One, closing side 1 with One, and then ending the album completely there. And then you have to flip it over, and then you go into the dark stuff, although the whole album is dark. So, for example, you'd have Until the End of the World, you'd have Trying to Throw Your Arms Around the World, So Cruel, Ultraviolet, Acrobat, and ending on Love is Blindness. So side 2 would be a very dark, long, dark night of the soul. Now, again, it's a great album, but I think it would be better if it was played in the sequence in which the band played the songs live. And I know Ed has the same opinion as me about that. So great minds think alike. Now, where we get to other kind of ideas of classic album sequences, let's talk about Europa. So this is the 1993 album, which was the sequel to Acton Baby. This is my favourite U2 album. It is a hill I will die on, and if you want to disagree with me, just accept that I'm right and you're wrong around this. But also, it's perfectly sequenced for two sides of a vinyl LP. And by about 94, 95, just after this album came out, the sequencing for records was built around CD and not around LP. So you've got side one ends with Stay Far Away So Close, and side two starts with Daddy's Gonna Pay for Your Crashed Car. Now, the side one is a fairly full-on dense kind of thing that reflects the characteristics of the album up to that point. And each album has its individual character, it has its flavour, it has its personality, and an album sequence should best reflect that, and very clearly lay out right from the off, this is what the album is, this is what it does. Making an album that's 10 ballads and a hit song, and then putting the hit song first and putting that out as the first hit, and then everybody else listens to it, and the rest of the album is really depressing, and what's the point? So side one ends on Stay Far Away So Close, and the end lyric of Stay Far Away So Close is just the bang and the clatter as an angel hits the ground, and you've got the album closes with just a single drum hit, and that's it. That's the end of the side. That's a very clear, very final ending. And then you turn over, you start on side two, and you start with Daddy's Gonna Pay Your Crashed Car. And Daddy's Gonna Pay Your Crashed Car starts with a sample and a treated version of, I think, an old Russian, Soviet anthem. And so it opens the sides again with a second intro. So it lets you know we're into another part of the album now. This is a different part of the record. Unfortunately, this is the 2018 vinyl repressing. Double album, blue vinyl. I think it was exclusive from HMV for a period of time, according to the sticker that's on here. Exclusive only at HMV. Thank you, HMV. It's a good thing there's a HMV near where I work. It's a double album, and if we look at that, well, Stay is actually the middle of side two. Daddy's Gonna Pay Your Crashed Car is the last song on side two, and so you've got that moment of silence, that end, that pause, the chapter close, but you've still got another song that follows after that. Now on CD, not really a problem. On vinyl, the song that should have started side two actually ends side two, and that doesn't really make sense in the context of the album. It makes the album a lesser experience, as indeed does putting a couple of remixes on at the end of the album just to pad it out and to make it look a little bit more attractive and a little bit more sexy. So sequencing is really, really important, because if you have the sequence wrong, it doesn't make as much sense as it does anywhere else. So I'm going to bring up one of the best albums of all time, The Cure's Disintegration. This is the 1990 picture disc version of the album that has two less songs on it. I think the songs that are missing, and I'll very quickly check, are Last Dance and Homesick. So to me, when I listen to Disintegration with Last Dance and Homesick in them, it actually feels like they're slightly wrong, because Last Dance was a B-side of Pictures of You, and Homesick was a B-side, I think, on the American version of one of the singles. So as far as I'm concerned, Disintegration is a 10-song album, not a 12-song album. But the sequencing on this is perfect. It follows exactly the trajectory that I've pointed out here, which is that the album starts and it kind of, it sets its personality, and then it puts its songs in a sequence that makes sense and are complementary to each other. So we've got Pictures of You, we've got Close Down, Love Song, Lullaby, Fascination Street. That's a really powerful punch of songs that just do not let up, and they're all following roughly the same kind of sequence, the same kind of moods. There's the elements of things like Fascination Street is a very bass heavy song, and there's a lot of guitars that are in that as well. It's very heavy, and then you flip it over, and then side two is Prayers for Rain, which is all guitars. That spindly guitar riff that opens up Prayers for Rain keeps and sustains the album as it goes through. And what's really great about this album, and not enough people really pick this up, is that Plain Song and Untitled actually have the same main keyboard motif, but played at slightly different speeds. So, if you sped up, I don't know, I've never done it, but if you played Untitled at 45, it might be the same speed as Plain Song at 33. And here's another example of what I think is a fantastic album, but not perhaps amazingly sequenced. It's Depeche Mode's Songs of Faith and Devotion, the last album that they made with Alan Wilder in the band. Now, this is, I think, the culmination of their creative abilities. at that point. But if you look at the track listing of that, now the track listing of that is very, very different. So the track listing to that follows this kind of sequence. It starts off with I Feel You, it gets pretty heavy pretty quickly, it goes full on rock, and then it goes Walking in My Shoes, which is probably their best song, and then Condemnation, Mercy and You, and Judas, and it kind of feels like it's diving down. So the songs are slowly getting worse as they go along. Nobody would sit there. If you ask somebody what their favourite Depeche Mode song is, I guarantee you only the guy that's trying to look weird would tell you that Mercy and You was the best Depeche Mode song. We all know it's Rush, actually, is the best Depeche Mode song. But the sequence, deteriorates over time. And then side 2 starts Within Your Room's absolute classic. And then it has Get Right With Me, Rush, One Caress, and Higher Love. So the sequence that you've got there goes, pretty heavily. It starts off, it dips down. By Here You're Up To In Your Room. Then you've got Get Right With Me, which is, they barely played it live. Then you've got Rush, One Caress, and then Higher Love. And it doesn't follow the emotional reward that you would expect from an album. Now, I've resequenced this album substantially, and so, for example, my version of the album, the playlist that I've got starts Within Your Room, so that's a slow and gentle introduction of all the lyrics, all the musical parts, to the point where by the end of the song every member of the band is churned up to 11, and then I kind of follow it with Walking in My Shoes. Then I put Get Right With Me as the third song. Now, the reason I put Get Right With Me as the third song is at the end of Get Right With Me is like a remix of I Feel You. So you end up kind of, without knowing, you're listening to I Feel You in the middle of side 1. And then you follow it up with Rush, because the ending of Get Right With Me builds to a crescendo. There's a moment's pause, and then Rush goes bang, straight in. And that starts the song off for you. So, you keep the pace, you keep the tone. You've got a second action sequence about 40% of the way in, which is Rush. And you end side 1 with, I would have said, yeah, actually, you end it with One Caress, actually, is probably the best thing to do, because you've got this huge, big, song, all the guitars and everything all going at the top of the volume on Rush, and then all of a sudden, you're into this Baroque song with an orchestra, with, Martin Gore pleading to have One Caress. And then you start side 2 with I Feel You. So you've got a reprise in I Feel You of Get Right With Me. And then side 1 goes, oh, so this is the bit that you had at the beginning of the. So it's foreshadowing it, and one of the great things about an album with the payoff is if you foreshadow something and then you bring it back and mention it later on, then you kind of go, for me at least anyway, it goes I Feel You, Mercy in You, then you have Condemnation. As Condemnation, I mean, traditionally, side 2, track 3, middle of side 2, is the death spot. It's where you put all the worst songs on the album. Condemnation is a complete break of style from the rest of the records. It's this big, heavy gospel number with Dave Garn singing his heart out about how difficult some things have been. And part of that is about being an adult. Okay, well, it's really bloody difficult being an adult. Nobody ever told me when I was an adult that I'd have to do so much bloody adulting. And then you kind of follow that up with Judas. And then the end of Judas kind of fades out slowly, and you move into Higher Love, which has a slow and relatively gentle beginning. And that's kind of like the way that perhaps albums should be structured. Now, one of the other bands that I think is great and bad at sequencing albums are Pet Shop Boys. So this is actually the American version that comes with a 12-inch of Always on My Mind, but that's not why I've brought it out here. It just happens to be that's the version I've got. And in fact, this version of actually still sealed back from 1987, which is pretty amazing, really. There is a very battered version of it elsewhere in my record collection that's got lots of skips and jumps on it from where I played it as a 13-year-old boy, thinking only Neil Tennant really understood me. And then I discovered that quite a lot of other singers also understood me, or perhaps better, I understood them. So the sequence of this album is unimpeachable. It's perfect. One More Chance, What Have I Done to Deserve This, Shopping, Rent, Hit Music, It Couldn't Happen Here, It's a Sin, I Want to Wake Up Heart, and King's Cross. Fantastic sequence. And for example, I'm just going to pick out the the transition between Shopping and Rent, it's a perfect example of where you have two songs next to each other that work perfectly. So the ending of Shopping is kind of like an ascending keyboard riff that ends on what feels like, when someone's in the old days, people would punch in prices into shopping tills and ding, dong, 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 ding, and then so that's the sound that you've got at the end of Shopping. You've got like a fraction of a second's pause, and then Rent starts on exactly the same key and tone, but in a slightly different sequence. Go ding, so it feels like it's just another part of the song. And lyrically, the two songs kind of play next to each other. So Shopping, although people were jokingly going, "Oh, Pet Shop Boys are doing a song about shopping," how funny. No, Shopping is about buying and selling British government assets in order to make MPs rich. And then Rent, which is the next song, thematically is also about the fact, well, actually, you've removed people's ability to own their own assets. They now have to rent property as opposed to own it. And also, there's a thing about rent boys, Pet Shop Boys, and shopping and all that stuff. And there's a scandal about government MPs being, associated with rent boys, as they were called. So, perfect sequencing in this album. It's the type of thing people don't think about, and they bloody well should. Because if you put a little bit of thought in, it makes the record go from good to great. Now, this is where I give the Pet Shop Boys a kicking. The 2016 album, Super, does not have a Super track list. And I'll quickly kind of explain why. Now, if we look at Super, it's got Happiness, The Pop Kids, 20-something Groovy. And the sequence that we've got for Super is pretty poor. So, using the fantastic technology of fancy graphs, I have put together Super's running order, which looks roughly like this. It doesn't look anything like what you think an album should be. Happiness is pretty good and up. Pop Kids is pretty good. 20-something, mid-paced, a bit bland, not by any standards their best song at all. Groovy is a tangential throwaway, palate cleanser. You've got The Dictator Decides, and then you've got Pazzo. But Pazzo's a bit of a flippant song. In fact, side 2 of Super is much, much better than side 1. Side 2 has got Inner Sanctum, Undertow, Sad Robot World, Say It To Me, Burn, and Into Thin Air. Now, I've changed the track listing completely on this album, by the way, so that it's top loaded with pacey, fast numbers. So my version of it starts with Inner Sanctum, as the album always should, and as the live shows did. It then follows it up with Undertow and Burn, The Pop Kids, Groovy. So you've got 5 high-paced, fast songs that deal with a number of subjects that are all interrelated. And then you've got, Groovy and... let's think The Dictator Decides kind of take the temperature down a bit. So you end the side with Dictator Decides, and then Pazzo is the next song. Now Pazzo is a kind of like a bit of a silly instrumental workout. It's ideal. Side 1, track 1, palate cleanser, refresher before you go back into the guts of the album. And then you follow it off with Happiness, which is track 1 on the album, and then you follow it with Sad Robot World, Say It To Me, 20-something, and Into Thin Air. So the album kind of starts fast and pacey, and it gets dark and deep as it kind of goes along a little. And I think sequencing is something which the Pet Shop Boys aren't particularly great at. So I'll move on to this year's Hotspot album. This is the edition that you could buy from the band's website with a signed print of the cover. Again, the sequencing of this album is in my opinion, way off, because it has You Are The One, which is a nice instrumental ballad. It's got, it's a very nice love song. It's got Happy People as track 3. It's got Hoping For A Miracle. I don't even remember Hoping For A Miracle on there. But effectively, again, with the Pet Shop Boys album, I always think that you should have highs and lows as opposed to, you don't follow Will O' The Wisp, which is, to put it technically, a full-on banger with lasers, with a song called You Are The One, which is more gentle and ballady. So I would have put Will O' The Wisp, Dreamland, Monkey Business as the first 3 songs on that album, and it top-load the songs with pace and vigour and life and vim. Now, one of the best songs, or more correctly, one of the best albums ever in terms of sequencing, is this here, Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. Every song is the perfect song for that perfect place in the album, and then followed it up with the next best one that you've got. This is John Grant's Pale Green Ghosts. Again, fantastically sequenced record. I will be coming back to that when I talk about it in future. As indeed is this, which is Hope of the States Left, which again is perfectly sequenced. I listened to this today. Each song on there is in the perfect spot for the song that follows it and the song that precedes it. So, for example, it opens with Seconds, which is a 2-minute instrumental song, which kind of like opens up all of the instruments slowly, stops, ends on a spindly guitar riff, and then it goes into Blood Meridian. Blood Meridian opens with a spindly guitar riff. It sounds like it's part two of the same song. And we've also got, Industry and This Is a Question. So Industry on the album ends with, an echoed guitar effect, and then This Is a Question starts with an echoey guitar effect that's played live. So instead of going ding 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 on the, and then the other one goes diddle diddle, and it sounds like it's part of the same song. This is Idols, Joy is an Act of Resistance. It's got one of the best opening tracks we've got of any album, but also every song on that album is exactly the right song for the song before it and after it. So Colossus opens slow, it's coiled, it's tense, it's like it's gonna kick off, and then it does kick off, and then everything happens, the room explodes, it looks like it's the album cover inside the pit, except maybe the guys in the crowd aren't quite so well dressed, and the album just carries on with that. Now, album sequencing really important. Closer by Joy Division, perfectly sequenced in every way. The last two songs on side 2 are the Eternal and Decades. There are no two final closing songs on any album, not even on Disintegration. But it's ideal because the beginning and ending of each song perfectly starts off and ends the next place. Now, this one, controversial. Morrissey, Kill Uncle. Only 10 songs, one of the worst albums that Morrissey ever made, which is really strange because 4 of his best songs from that period were on singles. So we had, for example, My Love Life and I've Changed My Plea to Guilty were a separate single that was recorded at the same time. Pregnant for the Last Time should have been on there. And also there's The Loop, which is the B-side of Sing Your Life. And instead we have The Harsh Truth of the Camera Eye, Driving Your Girlfriend Home, Found. Those are not great songs. Those are B-side songs. The sequence that I would have for Kill Uncle would be very different. It would be Our Frank, Mute Witness, Pregnant for the Last Time, The Loop, I've Changed My Plea to Guilty, maybe King Lear. Then side 2 you'd open with. Actually, do you know what? I'm not that bothered in telling you about it, really. But the final running order for Kill Uncle is pretty bad, and really you should have the last two songs as maybe My Love Life, or On the End of the Family Line, My Love Life, and There Is a Place in Hell for Me and My Friends. This, 9 Inch Nails, The Fragile, perfectly sequenced album in every way, shape or form. Trent Reznor is a master of layering, so even the opening song, Somewhat Damaged, again it follows the same way which I love to open albums, which is that you start the album by bringing in each of the instruments one by one to let people know what's coming. You don't just go, bang, here's a punch in the face. You go, no, I'm going to show you what's going to happen. Because very few films start smack bang in the middle of an action sequence. Some of them do, but very few do. It normally starts off with some establishing shots, some establishing information. You don't generally tend to start a novel with, and then I realised he had his hands around my neck. That's not how you start a book. Not really how you start a film, unless you're intending to make something that's quite brutal and direct and goes all the way off. I'm going to mention this, which again is another perfectly sequenced album, Every Valley by Public Service Broadcasting. And where this album is really strong is that they make concept albums which are geared around themes. This one is around the way in which the Welsh coal industry created and described and provided life and meaning to Welsh villages, and the effects that the closure of the mines in the 80s had upon those communities. Now, every song on here is perfect in its exact correct space and place where it goes next. So, also, by the way, this is the clear vinyl edition. I think you could only get through indie shops. If you haven't listened to this band, please do give them a listen. Intelligent, smart group that use concepts and themes with as much fluency as Kraftwerk, operate in a slightly different musical environment. but they're absolutely well worth listening to, and so each song has an ending that complements the song that's both in front of and behind it, so that it sounds like it's one piece made out of 11 separate songs as opposed to 11 songs stuck together. Now, there's a band that I mention at pretty much every podcast, which I don't like. The band are called Big Black. They did an album called Songs About Fucking, and they sequenced songs about fucking in the way they just put their favourite songs first and the worst songs next. And I'm just going to give you an idea of, if you want to use a bit of technology about the graph about how listening to that album would look. It would look like that. It's a drop off a cliff, isn't it? And eventually, as I said earlier, you don't want Star Wars to end with the scene where Luke's moaning with his pretend mum and dad about how the fact that he can't get drunk and join the rebellion. Another issue that we've got is double albums. Sequencing in double albums is really, really difficult. The Wall is probably the premier example of a double album where the sequencing is really challenging. And some of sites, the second album of this is a really hard listen for two reasons. One of which is the music isn't as good as it is on the other one. Oh, this copy, by the way, has love from Gail and Angela to All the Best for the Future, okay. And it was bought on the 2nd of January 1980 from W.H. Smith's. But in the old days, and you'll see this, if you buy old classic albums, people will have put messages in there. Part of that is to make sure you don't forget who Gail and Angela are, although I don't know who Gail and Angela are. Another part of it is to make sure if you took the record to a party, is that nobody stole it. But for example, side 3 of The Wall has Is There Anybody Out There, Nobody Home, Vera, Bring the Boys Back Home, Comfortably Numb, Hey You. Hey You really should have been the album, that should have been the opener on side 4, I think. And it's got some really tough, difficult, not exactly fun songs to listen to. This one. Sequencing for a double album is there comes a point where you actually have to ask yourself, are there enough songs to make it worth a double album? Now, I'm going to mention another couple of albums before we get too much further into it. I think everybody on the planet has pretty much heard of this album. It's fantastically sequenced, actually. It opens on the slow and gentle beginning of I Want to Be Adored. The last two songs are This Is the One and I Am the Resurrection. This Is the One has a fantastic ending because effectively the song collapses into a bunch of echoed vocals. So the song's starting to kind of almost disappear. And then it moves into I Am the Resurrection, which is a big, huge guitar-led workout that really kind of, it's basically a rave with guitars. Couple of other albums I'll mention just in terms of how great sequencing is. Suede's Bloodsport. This is a fantastic album. It's incredibly important to me, and I will talk about this in more detail when I talk through my favourite albums of all time. But every song on here sounds like the perfect sequel to the song that came before it, and therefore by the time you get to, Sometimes I Feel I'll Float Away, towards the end of halfway through side 2, but most points people will go, oh, that's not very good, is it? But no, if you put less songs on there, you put better songs on there, and you don't have people listening to track 14 on Tori Amos's Boys for Pele, which is Agent Orange, and kind of going, why the hell is this song on the album? Now, the last song, or more correctly, the last album I will mention is Sea Monsters by The Wedding Present. This is the most perfectly sequenced album in the history of mankind, and if you want to disagree with me, you are wrong. Every song on there sits perfectly. It opens with Dalliance, which is a slow and gentle introduction to a wall of buzzsaw guitars. It has Dare and Suck and Blonde and Rotterdam, and each song ends in a way that is complementary to and feels like it could be part of the song that follows it. And that the whole album kind of comes to an end on Heather and Octopussy. And Octopussy is one of the best closing tracks for any album ever. It's just a slow and gentle revolving riff. It's a very simple, very basic song where David Gedge sings about, I don't want to go anywhere, I don't want to do anything apart from talk about the same old usual things, and it's just a really gentle, lovely way that the album just kind of slowly fades out of view and brings a closure, because the rest of the album, it's one of the best breakup albums ever written. But the rest of the album is kind of all building towards the fact that the singer really, really wants to have a girlfriend or a partner that he can share the rest of his life with. And by the time we get to the end of Sea Monsters, it feels almost that he might possibly even have achieved that. It's also got some wonderful graphics on it. Now, I've just been telling you about albums that have got great sequencing in and a couple of albums that have got terrible sequencing in. Primarily, the reason I've done this is because I'm going to be talking through bands that I really, really love and their discographies in future, and some of my favourite albums of all time. And what's really important is not just the albums that they are as presented, but the potential that sits inside the albums. So some of the best albums ever made have imperfect track listings that I've changed, or that I've changed the order of the songs, or I've moved some of the B-sides into the body of the album and taken some of the other songs out of it. And that's what makes the album better for me, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. A song belongs to the public as much as it belongs to the people that made it. And once a record is released, it no longer belongs to the artist, which is why you still get people putting REM's The One I Love in their wedding songs, even though that is clearly unsuitable to be played at a wedding, a simple prop to occupy my time. I'm going to wrap up here. Hopefully that's been helpful. I don't know. Useful, not boring, I don't know. Album sequencing is really, really important. We're all curating our own playlists, our own versions of albums these days by creating those playlists. The album still exists as a perfect work of art, as a sonic version of a film or as a book. It's a self-contained journey. The best albums have exactly the right number of songs on, and they have them in exactly the right order, where they all fit with and complement each other around them. And that's the difference between a good album and a great album and a classic album. And I'm going to wrap up here. And if you've got any comments, questions, etc., put them in the bar below. I will put up my preferred running order for some of those albums in the comment sections as well. Thank you very much. Hopefully that's not been too boring, and I will see you all soon. Bye.